All right, so we're here at the Red Pill Expo with the one and only Cynthia McKinney, former congresswoman, activist, amazing person. Cynthia, you talked some really incredible stuff during your speech here, and you talked about how the deep state came after you. I'm really curious to hear more.
Well, a lot of people, the terminology of deep state is new for them, but there have been some people who have been investigating what this particular phenomenon is for a very long time. And so I talked in my remarks about my interactions with those people who were first awakened, honestly, with the murder of JFK, President Kennedy, in broad open daylight, like a public execution. And they were so traumatized by what they witnessed that they wanted to get to the bottom of everything. And so they started an organization called Committee on Political Assassinations, COPA. And from their investigations, what they discovered was that there was like a common thread from JFK to MLK to RFK. And so the assassinations that took place in the 1960s were what my professor, Peter Dale Scott, who coined the term deep state and deep events and deep politics, that's all his brain work. And basically what they found was that there were certain actors who were consistent throughout that level of decision making. There were certain technologies that were available to these players, these actors, that no one knew about. And so, like, for example, the White House communications system. And that then they went back and they found all of this amazing information. And eventually what they were able to piece together is what we know now, and that is that everything we've been told about the murder of JFK is a lie. Everything that we've been told about the murder of MLK is a lie. And of course you've got the mind-controlled Palestinian Sirhan, who's sitting in prison in California, and or wherever he is in prison, and what we've been told about the murder of RFK is a lie. What we also know, and for people who are concerned about what's happening now with the FBI and all of the intrigue around really trying to prevent the will of the people who voted for Donald Trump from actually becoming expressed in the democratic process because of FBI intrusion into the democracy. And so for people who are concerned about that today, they need to understand that the COINTELPRO program, the counterintelligence program that was a part of J. Edgar Hoover's operation, basically they were spying on individual citizens who were trying to exercise their constitutional rights. They were breaking into people's homes. They were, they call it bad jacketing, but accusing them of crimes that they didn't commit. Exactly what we think we abhor today, that was common practice back then. So what I call on people to do is to understand the operations of our government and know that it is rotten to the core, and you can send good people to Washington, D.C., but they will become tainted because the system itself, it's a systemic kind of thing, and that needs to be changed. And the only way it's going to be changed is through the eyes and the ears, the oversight of the people. So we can't just go to the poll and vote and then say, okay, we're going to forget it for the next 4 years. We have to be involved in every step of the process. And then, even then, it's not enough, because you've got the special interests that have basically purchased the candidacies before the members of Congress are even sworn in. So it's very difficult to, Congress is supposed to exercise oversight, but they don't do it. And you can even see them playing games now. So yes, we need to be outraged, but we need to be so outraged that we become uncomfortable and outraged to the point that we're ready to do something different. And that's something different because, you see, doing the same thing, thinking the same way is what got us into this mess. And so now we've got to figure out, okay, well, maybe I need to make new friends. Then let's go out and find some new friends who think like us and who are outraged like us and who are ready to improve this country and have our values reflected in our policy. So that's kind of what I talked about.
Yeah, that was fascinating. So you mentioned that you don't think the deep state is a big fan of Donald Trump. Obviously, they weren't a big fan of you. What is it about, I mean, you guys don't agree on everything, obviously, but what is it about both of you that would attract the interest of these people? How do they work, and what is it that they don't like? What is it that they want to prevent?
Well, actually, from what I have discerned from the way things are operating is that there are three factions of the deep state. And if you go into Peter Turchin, who has tried to put a mathematical analysis on history, and he's come up with a theory about how the deep state, how these actors who are in the deep state, because we always have to remember that government is not that big thing, it's people. And so so basically what he has come up with, his theory of the deep state, is that after every period of economic growth, after every boom, then you have another faction or another group of people who begin to vie for power because they think they need to be a part of the deep state too. And so then what they will do is they will articulate the values of the average ordinary folks until they become involved and accepted by the older deep state people. But then what happens when there's only so many Supreme Court justice seats, there's only so many congressional seats, when there's only so many positions in the plum book? So then you're not able to absorb them all. What happens? The deep state fractures. So then you get one faction over here, another faction over here. And so I called them the Pilgrims and the, what did I call them? The Ziocons. The Ziocons and the Pilgrims, right? And then they're fighting. Well, then what happened, what has happened now is that you've got two factions of the Ziocons. They are fighting each other because basically the Pilgrims have been sidelined, and now the United States of America belongs to which faction of the Ziocons? Now, where does Donald Trump fit in all of this? Well, many of the Pilgrims think that Donald Trump represents them because they've been sidelined. But in actuality, Donald Trump is also propped up by one of the Ziocon deep state factions. And what we're witnessing today is the clash of who actually is going to be able to put their finger on the nuclear button. They are fighting each other, and we are merely the observers. We are the audience. But now this presents an opportunity for those of us who have been sidelined, in my opinion. So, both of these factions are minority factions, right? They do not represent the majority of the people in the United States for sure, and they absolutely in no way represent the majority of the people who are even paying attention and care about these kinds of things. They are minorities. And so if we can join and find those people who have been sidelined, who have been dispossessed, and they thought the United States belonged to them, and then all of a sudden they find out, oh my God, we're all black now, as my former hashtag unrigged colleague used to say, And so then, okay, then let's form a kind of a coalition. Let's see the extent to which we can work together. Because, $700 trillion to the Pentagon, that in 2000, whatever that was, when I asked Donald Rumsfeld about $2.3 trillion, imagine the waste, fraud, and abuse that comes with $700 billion, which is now the Pentagon's budget. Mm-hmm. So, the people are being fleeced. And who's going to stop it? That faction is not going to stop it. That faction is not going to stop it. And actually, that faction over there that's been sidelined, they were fleecing too. But so this is why I celebrate the rise of populism. Mm-hmm. And I celebrate that when all three of these factions are fighting, we get a chance to see. And this is one of the things that my friends who were students of the COINTELPRO program, they were the ones who were investigating the assassinations of the 1960s. This is what they've always said, is when those big guys fight, we need to have our eyes on them so we can understand what has happened to our government. So now we have the opportunity to see, understand. Well, actually, it's sort of like the Bloom's taxonomy of learning. Mm-hmm. So we can go all the way up that pyramid. So we can see, we can remember, we can understand, we can analyze, and then we can create new knowledge. And so this is what we're in the process of doing now. This whole thing about the three things, I haven't written it. I need to write it down in an academic kind of paper so that we can actually have other people refer to it and critique it. But this is what I see happening now. And it's really all based on the work of Dr. Peter Dale Scott, who originated the concept of deep state, and then combined that with the work of Dr. Peter Turchin, and he's the one with the cryodynamics who actually tried to put mathematical analysis on this phenomenon of the deep state, and this is what he came up with. And now I've refined it by saying, okay, now we've got the two factions of the deep state, the two Zyokon factions that are fighting each other after they've won. Now who's going to strip the U.S. of all of its assets? In very much the same way as happened with Argentina, that happened with Russia, well, it's the Soviet Union and then Russia, how the oligarchs were created. Mm-hmm. That same process is happening in the United States now.
Wow. So last question, and then I'm just curious, how can people find more about you? Where do you have a website and stuff? But do you think the establishment is trying to divide Americans and keep us bickering among ourselves based on, race and gender and pick your thingamajig? And where do people find more about Cynthia McKinney?
Okay, yes. And to answer your question shortly, yes. Divide and conquer is the rule of the day, or divide and rule. And so what I have done with my Power Cells idea is I've combined the work, the behavioral sciences that I know about how organizations lead and manage change, and sort of, with total quality management, that's something that people are pretty much familiar with. And maybe we can apply the concepts of total quality management to our governance. But what that also is going to mean is that we have to unrig ourselves, because we've been rigged by the propagandizing 365 days of the year. And for how many years? So now we have to understand that pretty much everything that the government has told us for how many years now is a lie. It's a lie.